All right, let's look at a few more examples for using lists in Python. This example here is a simple number search. So Codio is going to pass in two inputs, a list of numbers and a number n to look for in the list. Your job is to loop through the list and find the numbers specified in the second input. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Output the list element index where you find the number. If n is not found, output -1. Tip, remember the break statement? You can use it, but you don't have to. So I talked about the break statement when I was talking about my loops. I had a video on loops and what the break statement does, and I'll show you that here again in just a minute. But I wanted to point this out here. It says specified in the second input. That just basically what this means is Codio said they're going to pass you two inputs. Okay, so the first input is a list of numbers. The second input is the value you're looking for in that list. Okay, so they want you to look through the list, that first input, for the value as the which they gave you in the second input. Okay, so I'll show you here with an example. We're going to do, let's see, create a numbers, and we're just going to do something easy enough, right? And type it. I'm going to throw a few random. Oh, no, let's do 45. Sure. All right. So we'll say that's the numbers list that Codio is giving to us. Now what we want to do is find a value in that list. All right. So let's say we want to look for the number 8. All right. So this is kind of how it's going to be structured. You're going to get a list, probably going to be called numbers, and then you're going to have another variable called n. You're looking for n inside the list of numbers. Straightforward enough. Now what they want us to do is if you don't find n, to output -1. All right, so first, in this case, you can see from the numbers here that I'm going to find something. So we could do, let's say, I'm going to do this, oops, found index. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm creating a variable called found the index, because what you need to do is output the list element index where you find the number. Okay, so what we're doing is we're printing out the index. We're not printing out the actual element that we find. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a variable that will hold the index that I need to print out. Okay, so let's start our for loop and we're going to call this index. Right, and you can call this whatever you want. This just kind of makes sense, so maybe you can see how it's going. Then what I need to do is create a range, because I want, remember, indexes start from 0 and go all the way up to the length -1. Okay, so what I want it to do is start at 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, and I'm going to search each of those elements to see if it matches the value here. So what I want is the values from 0 to this length -1. Python has a nice len function, which is short for length, and then you just specify your list in there. And what this does, remember, the range, if you only specify one value, it starts out at 0 by default, and then goes up to and not including that value. So basically what this is doing is creating a range from 0 to the length of numbers -1. That's perfect, exactly what I need. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do an if, a little check here. If the value inside numbers at the index of index, remember this is going to start at 0, okay, because of my range it starts at 0, and goes up to 6 in this case because there's 7 elements. It's going to start at 0, so numbers at position 0 is 1. So I'm going to check and see if 1 is exactly equal to the value n, which is what I'm looking for. Right? On the second, that's not going to equal, right? So then it's going to go to the next one. Index becomes 1. Index 1 of the list is 25. So now it's going to check 25 and compare it to 8. So now what I want to do is if they match, what I need to do is do found index equals the index that I'm at currently. Okay, so if I find, let's see, I'm going to start out at index 0, those don't match. Index 1, those don't match. Index 2, no, those still don't match. Index 3, index 4, hey, I have a match, right? I'm going to say if in numbers index 4, which is 8, equals 8, it does. So what I want to do is I want to set my found index to the index where I found that number. Well, index 4. Once I find it, I no longer need to continue through my loop. So I'm going to just put in a break statement, because as soon as I find it, I don't need to continue on and search these other ones, because I know I already found it. This can, you may, under certain applications, you may not want to have this break. Like for instance, if you wanted to count the number of times n is in the list, then you would not want to break when you find it on the first try, right? You would want to keep looking to see if there's another 8 in there. In this case, I don't need to look any further, so I'm just going to break out of the loop. And what that means is, as soon as I hit this line, I am no longer going to continue with my loop. Index equals index. All right, so now let's come back here, and once all of that is done, I want to print the found index. Okay, and why am I getting an error here? For index, oops, because I have to use the keyword in. All right, so for index in the range from 0 up to the length minus 1, then I'm going to check the value. If it is exactly equal, I keep track of where the index was, then I break out of it because I no longer need to look, and then I print that found index. Now notice this, the tabbing here, okay? If it was right here, this is still inside the if block. And that's all part of the if statement. I don't want that there, so I want it outside of the if, right? But now this is also still inside the for block because of this, the indentation here. But I don't want it inside the for loop because otherwise it's just going to keep printing that found index every iteration. So I want it outside the for loop, so I'm going to line it up with that word. All right, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Check the output down here. Index 4, just as I suspected. All right, now let's see an example of where this, let's say the number is not in the list, okay? So remember, if it's not in the list, it needs to output -1. So 9 is not in the list. So let's kind of walk through this here. Remember, this starts out at 0. It's going to check index 0, that's not it. Index 1, no, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I still didn't find it. So that means that this line never ran because this statement was never true. Since this statement was never true, this never got changed from -1. It is just going to print what it started at. It never got changed, so it starts at -1, and we should be good to go. If we don't find anything, oh, look at that. There's -1 as the index returned. All right, I hope that makes sense. Moving on. So next one here, we will pass in a list of numbers. I'm going to use the same kind of thing here, but I'm going to change it up just a little bit. It's a list of numbers. I'm going to make these numbers a little bit different. I don't know, 18, 1, 2, 3, 2, yeah, good enough, whatever. And actually, I'm going to do, yeah. All right. So they're going to pass in a list of numbers. Your job is to find the largest number in that list and output its index. Okay, again, we're outputting the index of the value. We're not outputting the actual value. Okay, so they're giving us a little hint here. You will need to use a utility variable to store the maximum value and a decision to see if each number is bigger than the current maximum value. Okay, so since we need, remember we need to print out an index, so we're going to do something kind of like this to the found index. Why not? We'll keep the same name just for consistency. You can make this whatever you want as long as it makes sense. This time we're going to start it out at 0. And then I also want to have max value. You can, we need this to start out at some number, but if we started out at, I don't know, let's say 0. Right? Let's say I started this out at 0. Then I loop through my list. What happens if all of these values are negative? Well, then my max value always stays at 0, and I get bad input, or output, rather. All right, well, okay, that's cool. But, see, so that's going to cause a problem. So the better option, when you're doing something like this, whenever you're looking for a minimum value or a maximum value, start it out at the first value inside that list. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm taking numbers, getting the very first element inside the list, which is 18, and setting that as the max value to start. That way I know that this value is in the list, so if nothing else is bigger than it, I know I have the biggest one. I at least have something from the list, so I'm guaranteed my input or my output will be a good value, not some. If I put 0 and all the numbers were negative, I'm going to get 0 instead of the true maximum value inside that list. All right, and I have my found index. So now what I'm going to do, let's see here, for element, we just need to go through this loop here. We need to loop through the list for element in numbers. So what this is going to do is it's going to start out. Oh, and you know what? Nope. I need to do this a little differently. Similar, since I'm looking for the index, we're going to do it kind of like we did in the previous example where we went through each index. So we're going to do the same thing for index in range, length of numbers. Okay, so again, this is now I'm only specifying one value, which in this case is going to be the length of this entire list, which is 8, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, 6, 7. I can't count. It's 7 values. So that would be the same as doing range 7. It's going to do 0 to 7 exclusively, which is going to be 0 to 6. And those are all valid indices of this list, 0 to 6. And let's change this to index. All right. We have to have one tab in there to make sure we're inside the loop. Now what I need to do is, let's say if I need a decision to see if this value is bigger than my current maximum value. So we're going to do if numbers at index, very similar to the previous example, and we're going to do greater than. Okay, we only want to see if it's greater than. You could do greater than or equal to. It won't change, won't make a difference for the output. We're just going to do greater than because we're only looking for anything bigger. Greater than my current max value. If that's true, then what I need to do is, well, I need to update my maximum value equals numbers at the index, and then I also need to update the index where that value was found. So found index equals index. You could do these in any order, it doesn't really matter. You can have them reversed if you want to. It won't change the output as long as they're both done inside this if block. Alright, so that's it. Now I'm not going to break out of this because I want to keep checking to see if anything else in the list is bigger. Right? I could, the very biggest element could be all the way at the end. If this was 100, right? If I could get up here to the end. If that was 100, then I would need to make sure I went through the entire list until I found that last element. Okay, I'm going to leave it at 10. And now what I want to do is at the end print my found index. Okay, so we started it out at 0. That way, if this was the biggest, if this one started at, I don't know, let's say 180, well, that is, as you can see, the biggest element in the list. So we started out at 0 since I took that one as the first max value. Okay. So now if I didn't find anything bigger, this is still a good value to print. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. We know that the biggest one is going to be 89. That's at index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Index 4 again is what we should get. There we have it. Alright, moving on. This one's a little trickier. We are passing 3 inputs, a list of numbers, a multiplier m, and a value n. Multiply every nth element. Do not multiply the 0th element by m. Example, if n is 3, then start with the third element, which is index 2. So I'm just going to take this list again. Alright, numbers equals, and I'm going to add a few more in here. 5, 11, and 4. Okay, so let's say if n is 3, they want us to start at the third element, which is index 2. So 0, 1, 2. Okay, so they want us to multiply this one by the value m, And then they want us to keep going. So 1, 2, 3, then we should multiply this one by m, and then 1, 2, 3, multiply this one by m, 1, and now we're at the end of the list, so there's nothing else. So we should have 3 outputs for that. So let's give us an m, and we're going to, I don't know, set it equal to 2. It's easy to validate. And then n, we're going to start at, let's do 3, just since that's what was in the example. Alright, so this one gets a little tricky. So we still need a for loop for lm in, and we're going to want, in this case, I think we can do this with a range. It's going to be kind of interesting here, but we can see, we can get the exact values we want. So what I'm thinking here is we're going to create a list of indexes that I want to check. So we're going to start with the index at n minus 1. Okay, so we want, in this case, we want to start at index 2, and then we want the next value to be 3 more than that, right, because it's every n element. So we want the next index to be 5, and the next index to be 8. So I have 0, 1, 2, we wanted to get that one, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we should have those. We want to get this range. So to do that, it's actually pretty interesting here. So we start at n minus 1. Okay, that's going to start at 2 in this case. We're going to go all the way up to, okay, the length of our list. Why is it not typing? There it goes. The length of our list, numbers, not including the list. And we want to step. Remember, the third element, the third value passed into the range function is the step. All right, it defaults to 1, but in this case we're going to overwrite that to n. So what this is doing, okay, is we're getting a range. I'm going to type this down here. So we're getting a range. N is 3, so we're going to do 3 minus 1, which is 2. The length of numbers is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 values. So that should go 9. And n is 3. So what this is doing is it's starting out at the value 2, going up to but not including the value 8, and look at that, that's what we need in our range. I'm sorry, up to but not including 9, which is 8. And we're going to increase each time by 3. So it's going to start at 2, go up by 3, go up by 3, up to, but not including 9. So perfect. That should be exactly what we need. So for lm, and actually I'm going to call this, instead of lm, I'm going to call this index. For index in the range of indexes that we calculated, we're going to, what do they want us to do? Multiply every nth element by m. So I think they want to just print it. I'm not sure if they want you to add it to a list or not. I'll show you the printing one first. So we're going to print the element inside numbers at the index times the multiplier, or m in this case. So we're going to just double each one of those elements at the index in the range that we provided or calculated. So we should get 8, 90, and what was this one, right? 12. So let's see what happens. Run it. There we go. 8, 90, and 12. Exactly what we thought it needed to be. Now, that'll work if Codio was expecting you to print each element. If they want you to print a list, then what you're going to need to do is have some kind of a output list. Remember to set it to an empty list so that you can add to it. And then all you're going to do is output list dot append. And you're just going to append the value. And then at the end you can print your list. Output list. Okay, and then that'll do, it'll do the same exact thing, but this time it's going to be in list output. So there it is, 8, 90, and 12. They just got added to a list instead of printed each time. Okay. All right, last one for this one here. We're passing in a list of numbers. You need to create 2 lists, then put all the odd numbers in one list and all the even numbers in another list. I'll put the odd list first and the even list, then the even list. tip, you should use the modulo operator. I talked about the modulo operator when I went over my numerics, numerics data type. So we use the modulo operator to decide whether or not the number is odd or even. A function is provided that does this. So since a function is provided, I'm not sure exactly how Codio did that, but I'm going to just do it kind of like this. I'm going to declare my own. So don't worry so much about how I'm doing this, but this will just keep it kind of true to what Codio is giving you. Return num mod 2 equal to 0. So what this is doing is it's taking the number, dividing it by 2, and then checking the remainder. That's what this modulo operator does. Checks the remainder to see how much is left over. So if a number is, I don't know, 12 divided by 2 is 6 with none left over, so the remainder is 0. In that case, it is an even number, and this will return true. If it was 11 divided by 2 is 5 with 1 left over, so 1 does not equal 0, and it will return false. So that's all that is. We'll get more into two functions later. But now what we can do is we can call this just like you call your print function, your range function, all these other functions. You can call this the exact same way. And I'll show you that here. So now all what we need to do, we're getting a list of numbers. I'm going to get my list here, just to copy. Alright, and then I have to create 2 more lists. Creating lists, we're going to do an odd list, set it equal to an empty list, even list. If I could do the right one here, even list. Again, set that equal to an empty list. Now we're just going to go through here for lm in numbers. So now we don't need the actual indices. We'll just use each element value for itself instead of the index. And now we need to have a decision. We got to determine, should we put it into the odd list or should we put it into the even list? So we need an if statement. If, and then we just call our function. If is even, we'll pass in the element. That's going to return either true or false. If it's even, it's going to return true. So then what we want to do is even list. We're just going to add into our list the element that we determined is even. Else, odd list dot append our element. Okay, so that should take care of it. So what this is doing is it's going through each element in the list of numbers. So it starts out at 18. It's going to check it and say, all right, is this element even? If it returns true, which it will, then it's going to add 18 to the even list. Then it's going to go on to the next one, right, and do the same exact thing. If that one's even, well, it's not, so it's going to jump down to the odd list and add that to the odd list one. Okay, cool. So that should take care of adding everything to the list. Now we want to just print them out. Print. We got to do the odd list first, then print the even list, and that was it, right? Yeah, I think so. So we'll go ahead and run this here, see what happens. We got to make sure we get the definition of the function. There we have it. So now we've got 2 lists, the odd list here, 25, 3, 11, 45, 89, 5, and the rest of them, 18, 4, 6, 10. Looks right to me. So there you have it.